former President Trump's challenger, Hillary Clinton, took to CNN this week to call for a, quote, formal deprogramming of what she calls the MAGA cult.
Very strong partisans in both parties in the past, and we had very bitter battles over all kinds of things, gun control and climate change and the economy and taxes. But there wasn't this little tail of extremism wagging the dog of the Republican Party as it is today. Mm-hmm. And sadly, so many of those extremists, those MAGA extremists, take their marching orders from Donald Trump, who has no credibility left by any measure. He's only in it for himself. He's now defending himself in civil actions and criminal actions. And when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members, but something needs to happen.
2024 candidate and Trump challenger Ron DeSantis was put in a tricky place of responding to Clinton's comments on CNBC this morning. Let's watch.
Yeah, but I reject that. I mean, look, these are patriotic Americans. They want to see the country do well. How do you keep them, though,
if you attack President Trump? You've had trouble walking that fine line between really attacking him and not wanting to alienate his supporters.
There's a lot of differences. This is all fair game. These folks get it. They want to see the country do well. Some people will be with Trump no matter what, but I think the bulk of the people are people that appreciate what he did. They also understand that he's got limitations in terms of his electability. He would be a lame duck on day one if he could even get elected.
It's such a funny interview. The reporter essentially asked, Hillary Clinton said to send the MAGA folks to the gulag. What do you make of that? And then he tries to give a response to an impossible question. And he's like, you know what? You as a candidate really have to toe the line between being friendly with Trump and really campaigning against him. That's probably hard for you. What an amazing line of questions, first of all. It's kind of comedic the way he's just so frank about it. But I think this is a crazy situation. This might be another deplorables comment. Because she didn't say there's a rise of fascism, right-wing extremism in America. We're really going to need to think about how to deal with that. What are we going to do in our communities to get through to a lot of people who think this way? No, she said we need a formal deprogramming in the kind of language that someone who has a background in establishment politics would use. This is something that the Security Council would probably write in a memo to the president. And I honestly think that it's not so different from the concept of a gulag. Like, I say that because it's funny, but also what she's talking about is forced ideological deprogramming. That was the role of the gulag. How does she think this is going to play out in the United States of America? I mean, seriously, it's an absurd thing to say. And the person who was the interviewer laughs it off. I think this is a huge moment in American politics for Hillary Clinton to call for something like this.
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up the deplorables comment, and when I first saw this story, I thought, oh my gosh, it's deplorables 2.0. That didn't work when she was running, so now she's like, okay, they're not just deplorable people, but they're so flawed that they literally need to be reprogrammed. Again, like you're saying, I think gulag is a fair term. Send these people off to gulag, and maybe they'll learn a thing or two about how it's best to govern and how the United States ought to be run by people like Hillary Clinton? It's just absurd. And the fact that we are still in 2023 talking about how she has not gotten over losing to Donald Trump in 2016 is just insane to me. Her entire, she's kind of, I don't even know how to put this. This comes off as being obviously, insulting, which I think in one way it's meant to be, but like somebody who gets dumped and then their entire personality becomes the fact that they were dumped. Like Hillary Clinton had a career before she ran for president. She could have had a career after she ran for president and lost, but instead she continually brings this up over and over again, and her entire personality is about opposing Donald Trump, apparently name-calling his supporters and suggesting that they be reprogrammed, which is very much not an okay thing that we do here. For all the Democrats talk about, we love our democracy. Sending people for cultural reprogramming is very much not in line with what a democracy should be doing. And I'm reminded of a commencement address she gave, I think it was over a year after the 2016 election, in which she spent the entire commencement address where she's supposed to be inspiring this next generation of young minds to be excited for the future and maybe impart some life advice to them. She spent the entire commencement address complaining about how she lost the election, and not even that, but again, how this election was stolen from her allegedly, because in her mind, as with most of these establishment types, it was her turn to be president, and those pesky Americans who dared to think for themselves and not go along with what the establishment wanted stole that from her. So in a way, she's right. The election was stolen from her, but that's only because the American people decided that what the establishment wanted is not what they wanted or needed at that point in American history. And to hear her still dragging this grudge match out over and over again is getting so tired and old. And it would be interesting to see if she could bring herself to, again, take up a different topic to actually make a positive difference in this country. She could. She's just choosing not to and continually being hung up on this one point in history and just waging this vendetta that apparently will never end.
Yeah, she's going on year 4 of her I Lost tour. Actually, no, we're approaching year 7 of Hillary Clinton's I Lost tour. But Spencer, imagine how hard it is for her to have cheated to get the Democratic nomination and then still lose. What's that got to do to a woman's ego? I mean, come on, to cheat and still ultimately lose. Hillary Clinton in 2016, I'm not talking about the general election, by the way. We know that in 2016, there was a huge court case around what she did within the Democratic Party, which needed a lot of funds. She injected a lot of funds into the Democratic Party. And then when the primary was still happening and she was essentially competing with Bernie Sanders for the Democratic nomination, she tapped into the victory fund that was supposed to be used in the general election for the candidate. So she had access to way more funds that she should not have had access to within the Democratic Party, use those to run against Bernie Sanders, who was polling extremely well, was the candidate that could beat Donald Trump in a general election. And then not only this, but they had the dirty politics internally within the DNC, which we know Hillary Clinton had her hands on the levers of, where they took away Bernie Sanders' entire voter database weeks before the Iowa caucus. So even within the Democratic Party, she was pulling these dirty tricks in ways more than just tapping into their bank accounts for her own use. This is someone who pulled every single stop to try and win and still lost. And now I think, Spencer, you're right. It's become her entire personality. And to say that these people's minds are so sour and wrong that they need to be deprogrammed, I think it's coming from a really personal place because they voted against her. And she thinks so highly of herself that something must be wrong with their minds for them not to be aligned with her. Let's not forget the years and years, if not decades. It actually really is decades, if not, a century or more of programming that the American people had to vote with the establishment way of thinking. These people have already been programmed. People are now questioning the programming and questioning their trust in government because of the kind of neoliberal programming that supported candidates like Hillary Clinton. This is the direct result of that. And so she's going to need to grapple with that, but I'm not confident she will.
No, I mean, I think she's proven that she literally can't bring herself to grapple with that fact. And like you were saying, how hard is it to be Hillary Clinton knowing that, again, you rigged the primary on the Democrat side just to make sure that, kind of thought that her last obstacle was a pesky, Democrat like Bernie Sanders who might try to challenge her, but thought she had that out of the way and she would have no problem beating whoever the Republican was and definitely have no problem beating Donald Trump, only to lose. And then turn around 4 years later and watch Joe Biden from his basement beat Donald Trump, and then go on to be the kind of president that Joe Biden is, where he's just constantly getting struck down at the Supreme Court. He can't make it through a speech without, whispering, yelling, all these other things. Most of the things that he's tried to do have been struck down by the Supreme Court. He's now flip-flopping and going back and building chunks of border wall. For her to think, I wouldn't have governed like that, like surely Hillary Clinton is just watching this and going, what did I do wrong? And unfortunately for her, the answer is she was Hillary Clinton. And that was something that was just not going to work. And obviously that is got to be a terrible thing for her to watch and see happening. And then to see Donald Trump now coming back again and her probably thinking, is my party going to have to go through this again? And probably, I'm sure in some corner of her mind, she's been thinking about throwing her name in the ring, to replace Biden on the Democrat ballot. Because when you're somebody who is this obsessed, I'm sure she's had the thought about, well, what if, we replace Kamala Harris with me as the vice presidential candidate? Or what if I take the top of the ticket and run with Harris as sort of this, old guard, supposedly new guard that's not new ticket? And I honestly can't imagine what it's like to be Hillary Clinton, but I would not want to be either her therapist or probably her dog, or definitely not Bill Clinton. I mean, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, like life has not been that kind to Hillary Clinton. I don't think anyone deserves necessarily to have a life that's easy, but Hillary Clinton has really gone through it. And it's just a shame that, again, she's not taking the opportunities and the platform that she does have as somebody who was a U.S. Senator, who was a First Lady, who's done all this work in different fields. The fact that she's not even trying to use the platform that she did get and built over the years for anything worthwhile is, I think, really sad and kind of, again, an indictment of what her values are and how sort of very thin her commitment to the principles she espoused when she was running in 2016 actually are, since she's just basically abandoned all those things ever since she lost to, again, as we've been talking about, making her entire personality, career, speaking engagements, everything about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think Hillary Clinton in the early days when she was an activist speaking on the floor of Congress for policies like Medicare for All, advocating for people who don't have health care in the United States. That's a very different person from the Hillary Clinton that ran in 2016. It's a very different Hillary Clinton than was the First Lady under Bill's presidency. And so I think a person like Hillary Clinton, who had values at one point, who would understand when Bernie Sanders sat before the board, the editorial board of the New York Times, when they were interviewing Democratic candidates, deciding who they would endorse in 2020. And they asked him what he thought of this same group of people that Hillary Clinton said needs formal deprogramming. He said, what we've got is a working class that's been left behind policy-wise in the United States. They're living in an economy that has been rigged against them. They work for 40 hours a week or more and still struggle to pay their bills. They are not getting a fair shake. They don't trust their government because election after election, they promise to change this and make life better for everyday working people in America, and then they don't. So obviously they're looking for alternatives. Some of them, based on their fear that things might not go well for them, they might have an accident and not be able to pay their bills and might become homeless, because most people in the United States are on the edge of that. Those people in that mindset of fear might actually like a demagogue who says, we're going to shake things up, we're going to drain the swamp, we're going to change how this whole thing works. They might be so desperate for change that they're not necessarily a fascist or right-wing extremist who needs deprogramming. They're probably regular working people who are terrified and who don't pay as close to politics as Hillary Clinton does, who might not fully be aware that they might be aligning themselves with some right-wing extremists. And Hillary Clinton is so disconnected from the working class in America that she doesn't realize really what people who vote for Donald Trump believe in or who they are. And so I think that's her fundamental problem, is that she's disconnected and only thinking about her own career.
Yeah, and I think we've seen some hints of that same line of thinking from President Biden and his administration. I'm remembering his very angry speech in Philadelphia talking about, fascism and the importance of democracy. And it was that same sort of broad brush that he was using to paint, again, basically everyone on the right as fascists and enemies of democracy, when in fact, a lot of the people who had voted for Trump in 2016 had been Democrat voters up until that point, but again, just felt so left behind and lost in this country and this economy that they felt like they had to shake things up. And so I think Democrats, especially people like Hillary Clinton clearly, and Joe Biden potentially now in 2024, do themselves and their campaigns a real disservice when they paint with that broad brush, because again, oftentimes they're insulting the people who would otherwise prefer maybe to vote for their party. But that's something definitely to keep an eye on as the election progresses. We'll be right back with more Rising right after this.